They were called the people of the sun and believed that they were elected by their tribal god to carry out the destiny of the world. Guided by this religious imperative, the Aztecs fought their way to domination of the Western Hemisphere. They exacted tribute from over 30 other city-states. In 1519, ruled by the priest-king Montezuma, they were at the zenith of their power. But on April 22nd of that year, a small army of 508 soldiers, led by conquistador Hernan Cortez, landed on the shore of Mexico. Why did Montezuma refuse to fight this enemy that would ultimately imprison him and change the face of the New World?
This series presents information based in part on theory and conjecture. The producer's purpose is to suggest some possible explanations, but not necessarily the only ones, to the mysteries we will examine.
Montezuma, king of the Aztecs, is about to meet his destiny. It is the 8th of November, 1519, and it is one of the most unusual confrontations in all of history. He believes he is meeting a god. But this god is in the form of conquistador Hernan Cortez, who had reached Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Aztec Empire, by a combination of shrewd strategy and a mystical confidence that his time in history has arrived. At his side is the Indian woman known as La Malinche, who is his translator and a key to his understanding of the Indian people. Today, in the center of Mexico, workers are uncovering the great temple of the Aztecs. The site was discovered by chance in 1978, and both as a structure and as a symbol is the most important single site in the Aztec world. Dr. David Carrasco is a professor at the University of Colorado.
The Aztecs lived in the north, in a place called Chicomostoc, or the place of seven caves, and there, their god Huitzilopochtli appeared to the shaman priest in a dream, telling the priest that he should move the people to another location, and that location would be marked by an omen in the landscape. And there they were told that if they built their city in this place, their city would be the queen of all other cities in Mexico, to whom people would come as one supreme among all the others. It was at this very spot that the Templo Mayor was built.
The remains of the temple and the few other artifacts that survived the conquest tell us of the awesome power of the Aztecs. Since religion was at the core of their society, their pyramids were built on a scale more fitting of gods than men. The Aztec calendar was invented by priests who were well versed in astronomy, and it was remarkably accurate. More accurate, in fact, than the Roman calendar we use today. Their nobles and priests were schooled in history, religion, and prophecy. They were not only learning from their past, but believed they could predict their future. Their conquest had enabled them to create a world of luxury, and their lush gardens fed their growing armies and put flowers on the tables of their nobility.
The primary sources that we have depict Moctezuma II as a highly sensitive, very spiritual, and deeply concerned Tlatoani, or king, who had a very close relationship to the major deity of the Aztecs, Huitzilopochtli. He carried the influence and the power of Huitzilopochtli in his own heart. He was the spokesman for this great deity.
The Aztecs had a cyclical concept of time. Every 52 years, a new cycle began, and the gods had to be appeased at these crucial periods to assure the continued prosperity of their civilization. The year 1519 was the beginning of a new cycle, and there were ominous signs that their world was in danger.
The Aztecs tell their story of the conquest in a very unusual way. They begin their story of how their world came to an end by telling not how the Spaniards first came to their land, but by telling that there were omens in the sky, signs in their own heavens, which indicated that their world, or their cosmos, was coming to an abrupt and violent end. The first omen that appears is a rip in the sky, which bleeds drop by drop onto the Aztec world, celestial influences. The second omen is a thunderbolt, which hits and burns down the temple of the great god Huitzilopochtli. A number of omens follow, which indicate that the Aztecs understood their own collapse as originating with celestial influences, not the presence of Spaniards.
The final omen was the most frightening. One night, throughout Tenochtitlan, a woman's cry was heard. My children, we are lost." It came from everywhere and from nowhere, and the people were afraid. It is an eerie fact that the arrival of Cortez was foretold by the Aztec prophecies. Irony and coincidence played instrumental parts in the collision of these two great cultures. It was as though some guiding force had arranged the elements of this great drama, which the characters then acted out. We have records of this historic event in a personal account written by Bernal Diaz, a soldier in Cortez's army, and in the colorful picture writings of the Aztecs themselves. Both cultures seem to confirm the warning of the omens. But Professor James Lockhart has a different interpretation.
The omens tell us mainly what the Aztecs, or the Indians of that area, were thinking many years after the conquest. Most of the ones we have are a generation or generation and a half. They're their attempt to explain what happened. And the kinds of things that we have, astronomical phenomena, strange animals, and the like, are part of a standard repertoire that these people often use to explain bad things that happen to them after the fact.
Cortez was totally unaware of the Aztec situation when he approached the shores of Mexico. His main concern was keeping his expedition together, and to prevent desertion, he burned his ships after he was ashore. The great god Quetzalcoatl was prophesied to return on the very day that Cortez lands, and Montezuma has his people watching the coast in anticipation of this momentous event. A messenger brings him drawings of these beings, and the light-skinned, bearded figures are frighteningly similar to the traditional description of their god. Montezuma is overwhelmed and afraid to receive this mythical being, but also afraid to arouse his anger by keeping him away. What hand was guiding the Cortez expedition to land on that exact day? The mission was nearly aborted many times. Even as it got underway, conflict and uncertainty made it doubtful whether it would ever reach its destination. Yet, Cortez's sense of destiny pushed him on, ironically fulfilling the Aztec prophecy. Who knows where or how the Quetzalcoatl legend originated? His image was on every temple in the empire. The more fantastic theories see in Quetzalcoatl an Irishman, Norseman, or even Atlantean, who had landed on Mexico's shore in some ancient time.
Quetzalcoatl was important because he ruled a magnificent kingdom, a magnificent city-state in which there was abundance, harmony between the gods and human beings, agricultural stability. But at a certain point in the golden day of Quetzalcoatl's kingdom, he had to leave, but he promised to return one day and restore the abundance and stability of this marvelous situation. It appears from the primary sources that we have that when the Spaniards began to march inland in 1519, led by Cortez, that the Aztecs, and especially the Aztec king Moctezuma, interpreted the presence of the Spaniards as the return of this king Quetzalcoatl. And he investigated this identity in a number of ways. First of all, he sent out some representatives to paint pictures of Cortez and the Spaniards so that these pictures could be brought back and compared with the pictures that they had of their own Toltec ancestors. Secondly, Moctezuma sent out food to see if the Spaniards would eat the Indian food, would recognize it. Were they indeed human beings, or were they other kinds of beings, or were they some sort of combination of beings, human beings and supernatural beings?
Many of the Indians near the coast do not share Montezuma's reverence for these intruders and want to drive them out. But their fighting methods are no match for the Spaniards.
The battles between the Spaniards and the Indians usually ended in Spanish victory. The Spaniards had the great advantage of steel, which both offensive and defensive gave them an advantage that the Indians simply could not equal. The steel sword could cut through anything the Indians had. The steel helmet could not be penetrated by anything the Indians had. The other great advantage that the Spaniards had was the horse, which fulfilled the function, essentially, of a tank in modern warfare. And these two then were used in conjunction. A fairly large body of Spanish footmen with their swords would hack away at huge numbers of Indians, killing them and killing them and killing them until they got tired. Whereupon the horsemen would burst out and push the Indians back, which they could do. And then they would return to inside the Spanish group, and the Spaniards would begin doing it all over again.
After being defeated on the battlefield, several tribal emissaries beg for peace and bring gifts as a sign of friendship. Cortez uses the occasion to further impress upon them his invulnerability. He has a horse brought to him, knowing that to them, this is a beast of the most fearsome proportion. He is quick to take advantage of the moment. He takes the helmet of one of his soldiers and calls back the frightened envoys. He then commands them to take the helmet to Montezuma and have it filled with gold. Even this helmet seems to be an object of wonder to them.
It appeared to them that this helmet was very similar, if not the same kind of helmet, which the great Aztec deity Huitzilopochtli wore. We're told that the helmet was taken to Moctezuma, and when he saw it, he marveled at this possibility, and in fact compared it to the helmet which was associated with Huitzilopochtli, and was very impressed by the similarity and in fact afraid.
Montezuma does as commanded, but still he sends the message for Cortez to come no further. At the heart of the Aztec belief system was fear. Fear of the apocalypse, which would inevitably come and annihilate the tribe. The function of the Aztec priests was to postpone this apocalypse as long as possible. And this could only be accomplished by pleasing the many gods with the hearts of human sacrificial victims.
There are Aztec myths, Aztec stories, which tell that the Aztec city itself, the great temple of the Aztecs, was created as a result of the sacrifice of deities. These stories of sacrifice of gods became the models for the ritual system and the ritual processes of the Aztecs themselves. That is, as the gods had sacrificed themselves to give life to human beings were asked to sacrifice other human beings, which was understood to feed the deities and regenerate the world.
Cortez receives his helmet, along with the warning not to come. One of the other tribes is more emphatic. We are going to kill these who are called gods and offer them up for sacrifice. Cortez gathers his men to pray for good fortune and strength against an enemy that outnumbers them more than 1,000 to 1. Against such overwhelming odds, it seems foolhardy for Cortez to continue his advance. But his ambition propels him forward, and the lure of wealth and power keeps his troops behind him.
One of the most repulsive dimensions which the Aztecs felt about the Spanish invasion of their country was the Spanish greed for gold. The Aztecs said of the Spaniards, they're like dogs seeking gold. Gold is their sickness.
The lure he holds out to the Indians of Mexico is freedom from Aztec domination. He will use every tactic at his disposal, every weapon in his arsenal, and every person in his path, in his determination to become master of the New World.
People have been saying for a long time that Cortes didn't tell it right. He overpraises Mexico as to its great extent and population and wealth. Not that it wasn't impressive, but he doesn't really care about that so much as he wants to impress the emperor back home that what a service he has done in giving him such a huge principality. He also over-evaluates the religious component and the patriotic component in what he's doing. They may have been very real too, but that wasn't really the reason that he did what he did. But in his letters back home, it appears that his whole motivation is Christianity and service to the emperor, when actually his motivation is that he be confirmed as governor.
Even after consulting with his gods, Montezuma can think of nothing to avoid the impending disaster. Cortes is invulnerable in battle and immune to magic spells. He certainly must be a god. It was ages ago that Quetzalcoatl was driven out of the land by a rival deity, and now with his return, there will be a clash between the two powers that will do incalculable damage.
As the Spaniards were approaching the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan, they expected to see something magnificent and great, because they had heard about Moctezuma's great city, the great temple of Tenochtitlan, and the mighty power of the Aztec nobility. When they entered the city, what they saw was even much more magnificent.
Bernal Diaz describes the Spaniards' approach to the capital city. When we saw the town with buildings rising from the water, all made of stone, it seemed like an enchanted vision. Some of our soldiers asked whether it was not all a dream. Montezuma himself greets them as they enter the city center with these words: "O Lord, with what trouble have you journeyed to reach us, have arrived in this land, your own city of Mexico, to sit on your throne, which I have been guarding for you this while. I have been watching for you, for my ancestors told that you would return. Welcome to this land, rest a while, rest in your palace."
I believe that Cortes, in fact, was taking an enormous risk in going into Tenochtitlan. But I'm not sure that the Spaniards realized that they were. They had a long history behind them of entering into the presence of the cacique, or chieftain, or king, seizing him in the course of some friendly parley and getting away with it. They also had an equally long history of winning battles. So I'm not sure that they fully realized the risk to themselves that they were taking.
Montezuma has actually moved out of his palace to make room for Cortes. It is a time of great anxiety, and Montezuma feels it is more necessary than ever to continue the sacrifices. The Lord of the Dead needs victims. From their quarters, Cortes and his men can see the grisly spectacle of the sacrificial victims being thrown down the steps of the pyramids. Finally, Cortes can endure it no more.
When Cortes and his troops first arrived in the city, Moctezuma took them to the great temple. And standing on top of the great temple, Cortes is, according to Bernal Diaz del Castillo, turns to his own priest and says to the priest, perhaps this is a good time to ask Moctezuma to remove his own sacred idol so we can put a cross here. Moctezuma, like many of the other priests and chieftains and leaders in Mexico, were repulsed by this possibility.
The presence of the Spaniards is causing conflict among the Aztec leaders. Rumors of uprising are heard throughout Tenochtitlan. In a desperate attempt to avert disaster, Cortes takes Montezuma prisoner. This is a bold maneuver while in the heart of the Aztec Empire. And to further assert his power, he displays the bound king to his people. Spaniards now feel free to put up their crosses and altars and demand that the sacrifices stop immediately.
There were many uprisings of the same kind as that that led to Montezuma's death all over the Spanish Indies. It was a quite predictable process. First you seized the cacique or chieftain, and through him you ran his kingdom. But the people began not to like it, and so invariably you get secondary rebellions after the initial conquest.
As the uprising spreads, Cortez sends Montezuma out to persuade his people to stop the fighting. But the situation is out of control. Suddenly, stones rain down on Montezuma. He is mortally wounded and will die 3 days later. Though the fighting goes on for some time, the death of Montezuma marks the end of the Aztec Empire. The most powerful nation in the Western Hemisphere has come to an abrupt and tragic end, defeated by a force smaller than Montezuma's palace guard. The legend of Quetzalcoatl is curiously fulfilled, and who is to say that the same omnipotent hand that created the legend did not also push Cortez to the shores of Mexico on that April day in 1519?
So many questions remain about the conquest. What if there had been a different king at the time, one not so superstitious as Montezuma? What if Cortez had not landed in 1519? Would history have been different? Perhaps not. Perhaps it was as Cortez believed, and no matter what the odds, it was his destiny to be conqueror of Mexico.